Cold open. Picture this. It's 1:12 a.m. on a Tuesday. The cleaning crew is finishing the third floor when lights go out on 2 elevators and the access control system reboots. The crew swipes their badges, doors don't unlock, and the phone tree calls a vendor who won't answer until morning. The building generator switched incorrectly during a maintenance transfer, a scheduled network job kicked off, and a single control point decided to go quiet. Tenants wake to emails the next day. Facilities spend the morning triaging what should have been routine. That one off-hours event is an expensive, reputation-draining moment that could have been prevented with different choices before handoff.
Thanks, Alex. Glad to be here. The thing I tell teams all the time is, what breaks if this goes down? That question changes how you spec a system for nights and weekends. You design for daytime, when people are watching. The real test is the 3 a.m. cleanup, the weekend transfer, the holiday. Those are the moments that reveal single points of failure.
Let's step back and set the context. Off-hours behavior matters because a smaller operational team, fewer eyes on dashboards, and scheduled automation all converge at the same time. Systems that are highly optimized for peak weekday occupancy, aggressive night mode schedules, consolidated monitoring, deferred vendor SLAs often accept risk quietly. When a maintenance window or a generator transfer happens, those optimizations can cascade into outages. Today, we'll unpack the common causes, walk through the trade-offs of automation versus manual controls, and close with practical, budget-sensitive fixes you can act on.
Segment 1. Causes. Michael, from your experience, what are the usual failure modes that show up after hours? Walk us through the list and why each one matters.
There are 5 we see repeatedly. First, transfer timing and power sequencing. Generators, UPS systems, and transfer switches that don't hand off cleanly. From an operational standpoint, an awkward switchover can drop building controllers in the wrong order and leave doors or elevators in a limp state. Second, scheduled jobs, backups, firmware updates, nightly reboots that are set to run when staffing is lowest. That's fine until it fails. Third, reduced monitoring and alert fatigue. Teams mute non-critical alarms overnight and miss the early warning signs. Fourth, vendor responsiveness. Night and weekend support is often different from weekday support, and escalation paths are murkier. Finally, human factors. Cleaning staff or late-night contractors who aren't on the access roster or who improvise around a failed door create safety and liability exposures. Each of these looks manageable in isolation, but together they create cascading risk.
Those all make sense. When you say cascading risk, can you give an example of how one small failure leads to a much bigger operational problem?
Sure. Common scenario. A generator test runs after midnight and a building control system reboots. The access control server tries to reconnect to a cloud service, but a network firewall blocks the re-registration because of a scheduled firmware check that created a transient route change. Doors default to fail secure by design and lock down. A cleaning crew can't get out of a stairwell without a badge override, so they call security. Security escalates to on-call facilities, who call a vendor. The vendor only offers next morning service under the support contract. Meanwhile, tenants get paged and morale suffers. That's the downstream impact: lost access, alarms, emergency callouts, and reputational damage. These are not theoretical. 10 years of ops work shows that the sequence and the human escalation path are what make things expensive.
Segment 2. Trade-offs. Automation and night modes can save money and reduce nuisance alerts, but they also create hidden dependencies. How do you balance automation with the practical need for visibility and manual fallback?
You have to treat automation like a contract, not a convenience. First, define the failure modes you can tolerate and the ones you can't. If an automated schedule reduces HVAC overnight to save dollars, but that schedule also prevents a critical overnight humidity control for sensitive tenant equipment, that's a bad trade-off. Second, design clear fallbacks, manual overrides that are simple, documented, and tested by actual people, not only by simulation. Third, invest in visibility that matches your risk profile. A basic alerting system is fine for low-risk spaces, but mission-critical areas need redundant telemetry and a verified on-call path. Fourth, vendor SLAs should be explicit about night and weekend response and escalation. From an operational standpoint, take the slower, slightly more expensive option if it saves you multiple emergency callouts a year. And finally, practice your maintenance windows with a realistic crew so your team knows the real-world consequences of an automated action. That rehearsal is where you learn what breaks if this goes down.
Segment 3. Implications and examples. You mentioned real-world stories earlier. Can you share 2 concise examples where modest, non-CapEx changes improved off-hours resilience?
Example 1. We had a multi-tenant office building where elevator controls and access systems were on the same UPS cluster. During a routine after-hours load test, the UPS dropped out of rotation and the access controller rebooted under maintenance mode. Tenants couldn't badge back in the stairwells. Fix, we separated critical controllers onto a smaller, dedicated UPS and changed default door behavior to allow egress, restricted ingress during power anomalies. No major CapEx, mostly reconfiguration and one small UPS purchase, and it eliminated the worst outage scenario. Example 2. A portfolio-wide issue where nightly firmware pushes from a central management platform would collide with HVAC night mode transitions. The result was thousands of nuisance alarms and multiple false escalations. The solution was governance. We introduced a schedule matrix so firmware pushes are deferred for systems with active night modes, and we published a simple one-page escalation flow for on-call staff. That single policy reduced overnight vendor callouts by over 60% in 6 months. Both fixes relied on coordination, rules, and a couple of targeted low-cost buys rather than wholesale replacement.
Expert Insight, a practical checklist. For listeners who want to make immediate progress without overengineering, what's a concise operational checklist you recommend?
Start with 5 actions you can do this quarter. 1. Map the third shift critical path. Identify the systems that must stay up overnight and document dependencies. 2. Validate power sequencing. Run a supervised transfer test and watch the system order. 3. Audit scheduled jobs and firmware pushes. Move high-impact jobs to windows with adequate staffing. 4. Set clear vendor escalation tiers for off-hours with response time targets and an identified on-call contact. 5. Run a realistic night drill with the people who are on call remotely, not just the engineering team. Bonus. Publish a one-page emergency actions cheat sheet for night staff with explicit steps for egress, temporary bypass, and who to call. These are low-cost but high-value steps that sharpen recovery and reduce surprises.
Key takeaways. Plan for the third shift. Designed for the off hours by mapping dependencies, limiting single points of failure, and matching your automation to a tested fallback plan. Start small. A dedicated UPS for critical controllers, scheduled windows that respect night modes, and a published vendor escalation roster go a long way. For episode notes, a printable checklist, and links to sample escalation templates, visit our show page. Michael, any final thought?
Final thought. Don't confuse efficiency with resilience. That lean schedule that saves a few % on utilities can cost you days of recovery and tenant trust if it fails at 2 a.m. Build intentional redundancy where it counts. Rehearse your edge cases and ask, what breaks if this goes down, before you sign a handoff. It's a small mindset shift that changes procurement, contracts, and day-to-day ops for the better. It pays back quickly.
That wraps up today's episode of Built, Wired, and Secured. We covered designing for the third shift, how off-hours behavior exposes design assumptions, and practical steps to harden systems without overbuilding. Hopefully we gave you a clearer way to think about how these decisions play out beyond the initial install. For episode notes, checklist downloads, and vendor-agnostic templates, visit gdtechnology.com/built, wired, and secured/after-hours architecture. Thanks for spending time with us. Until next time, make sure the systems you're responsible for are built to last, wired with intention, and secured for the real world. Built to last, wired with intention, secured for the real world.